So thanks for coming along. I've seen a few people say, "Oh, I got that wrong." It doesn't matter. You joined in. That's the important thing here. It's a fun little competition. Yes, I did do a very big run last week, which is why I'm sitting down right now. If there's a fire in my house, I probably couldn't run to a fire escape right now. My legs are shot. But what it did do is allowed me to explore from north to south Wales over 6 days, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was incredible. It was wild. In fact, it wasn't wild. There were periods where I ran for several days and didn't see another person, which was lovely in many ways, but also it was just endless flat landscape. There's so many people around me when I did meet them as other runners were saying, isn't that such wild landscape? Isn't that such a beautiful place? For me, it was a barren desert. And it's very rare that I agree with George Monbiot for many reasons, but Monbiot and I do agree that so much of our British countryside is desolate, is barren, and that's hard to hear for many of us. This isn't meant to be a negative talk today. As you heard in the introduction there, I'm lucky enough to be an evolutionary biology professor. And also, more importantly for me, I've been able to work around the world for the last 25 years now with communities in far-ranging places such as Liberia in West Africa, Madagascar, Cameroon, right across Asia, South America, even up into the Arctic. And I want to take some of those ideas to bring to you because we can still extrapolate these big world-reaching concepts where I'm trying to save humpback whales in South America right through to chimps in Africa down to our local doorsteps. So here's the negative bit. In the UK, since the 1970s, we have had a 13% decline in our wildlife in general. That's the scary thing there. And the paper came out 2 days ago with a journal called PNAS saying that if you look at background rates of extinction globally, the expectation is a certain level. We are currently 354 times higher in terms of rates of ongoing extinctions compared to what we should have. And the factor there that's changing that is clearly us. Again, this isn't meant to be a negative thing, but there are a few more things I just want to throw out there. We talk about, and as many representatives from local and various councils in many ways, I know there will be certain species that will absolutely trigger you. So there is a trigger warning here. Bats, newts, and otters, I know they can be the bane of people's lives. So I'm not going to mention them because we know there are certain species or certain animals especially that do cause problems in terms of planning and other things. But what about the common things, the things that you see all the time? House sparrows. Well, since the late 1960s, we've lost over 30 million house sparrows in the UK, which is about a 40 to 50% decline in house sparrows. Swifts are down 53%. Butterflies, 80% of our butterfly species in the UK are in decline. This year, I've got a beautiful buddleia bush outside my house. I saw 2 butterflies the whole of this summer. Yes, it was a wet summer, but they should still be there. And actually, when we look at butterflies in their range, we've seen a 43% decline in overall range of butterfly species within the UK. But it's not just animals on the land as well. Our oceans, our seas, we have over 15,000 miles of coastline in the UK, and being from Norfolk, we have 93 miles of coastline just in Norfolk alone. So it's easy to forget our watery neighbours. But even iconic species such as skate, now whether you just enjoy fishing or whether you enjoy a bit of skate to eat, or whether you just appreciate they're there in nature. Skate, the good news is, skate aren't endangered. The bad news is because they're critically endangered. They are one step away from extinction, to the point where in the UK, the fisheries didn't catch a single skate for 30 years until the late 90s. Luckily, the populations are starting to increase. And I want to talk about skate later because that comes right to my very end point. Even things like wildflower meadows. Wildflower meadows, we all hopefully grew up looking at flowers, seeing wildflowers in and around the countryside, in and around our homes, even within derelict cityscapes in many ways. Since the 1930s, wildflower meadows in the UK have dropped by 97%. That's the shocker. That's the killer for me. I don't even work with plants. I work with animals. I specifically work with some of the bigger animals in a global context. But if we can't even keep our flowers going, if we can't even have our meadows there, then that's a real wake-up call to us. Now, this, like I said, isn't meant to be negative. This is a point of, that's our starting baseline. Whether you believe we're in a mass extinction or not, it's almost irrelevant. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you sit on either. This is something that does, affect us all. It's not up for debate. It's not up for, do you believe in climate change or not? The hard statistics are there. We are seeing decline right across the board. Whether you believe it's down to anthropogenic climate change or natural climate change, doesn't really matter, actually. I don't need to get into that debate. I know what it is, but it's not up for that right now. What's important is we have an opportunity to change this. And there are ways that we can do this, I think. And the whole point of my talk is how do we encourage wildlife into our towns and villages and cities, ultimately? And I think we can do this in 3 ways. We talked about the skate very, very briefly. The reason we know skate are starting to creep back isn't because of academics, isn't because of other scientists or conservationists or TV crews or anything like this. It's because of the public. So the Shark Trust and the Marine Conservation Society have opportunities for volunteers, members of the public, to collect egg cases. It's the most innocuous little thing. And many of you, as either as kids, or if you've got kids or grandkids yourselves, have been on the beach and found mermaids' purses. Well, let's turn that into a big citizen science project. And over the last 15 to 20 years now, various conservation charities in the UK, because they don't have the resources, the time, the money, the funding, the person power to do this work themselves, have employed people, have employed the general public to do surveys for them. And doing these surveys, people on the beach, kids identifying what these are, you put these ID charts out and suddenly you empower people to care about their environment. But more than that, they're able to help collect data for us as well. And we have seen little rises in certain species. And one of those is the skate up in northern parts of our coastline here. We see the same thing with the Great Bird Watch. We have a big bird watch every summer, and people from across the UK get involved. So then my first thing is empowerment of people. Make us stewards. And this is something I've seen right across the world. I've worked very closely with communities in the Congo and Uganda. And the best conservationists are those people who used to be hunters, who used to exploit their natural resources, who used to kill anything that had a heartbeat. And yet when we empower them, when we incentivize them, when we make them realize or help them realize what's on their doorstep and give them an opportunity to give something back, they make the greatest trackers, the greatest conservationists, the greatest ambassadors for the natural world. And we can do that. It's not up to me as a scientist. It's not up to Attenborough. It's not up to Packham or any of the hundreds of people I could mention here, but it's equally not just up to you. But what we can do, we use words all the time now. We use facilitate, capacity build. Let's do that to the public and get them empowered, get them on side, get them to feel there is something they can do. And I don't know how you all do that. We would be here for days if I were to chat to every single one of you to help you do that relevant to your local area. I live in Bristol now, and a big thing that we have here is the Bristol Downs, this big, beautiful, flat chalkland with lots of meadows. We have lots of volunteers helping that. It's something that's relevant to my local community. So find a way to empower your people is a massive thing here. And that can be kids in schools, it can be working parties, it can be days out, it can be corporate events, it can be anything like this. If you empower the community, it's not us and them. And it sounds so obvious, but getting people on side. The next is a flagship species. And these two link. So flagship species, my next one is an umbrella species. A flagship, we talked in one of your questions there about flags, about the Welsh flag there. It is literally the same thing. A flagship species is named after the concept that ships and boats in the medieval period, the front boat would have a big flag on the back of it. So you would know whose army was coming towards you, friend or foe. And we have the same with certain species. A flagship species is a mascot, is a representative, is a standard for everything around it. Is not necessarily the most important, but it might be a sexy species, the one that people want to get behind. And if you're trying to think of a good example, WWF with the panda. Whether you like pandas or not, or whether you believe they've probably come to their evolutionary endpoint, then regardless, they earn an absolute ton of money and represent a huge swathe of nature because they're iconic, because rightly or wrongly, the public gets behind them. Now, each of you will have a flagship species in your local area. It might be swallowtail butterflies across Norfolk. It's one of the only places in the UK that we see them. It might be ladybird spiders down in the south coast. These beautiful little spiders. If you're not a spider fan, just Google ladybird spiders for me at some point today. They are the most wonderful, iconic, cartoon-like little invertebrate. We have a whole range of different, but we've got spoonbills, we've got eagles, we've got crossbills, and these are just the birds and some of the other vertebrates. You've got you've got a million, quite literally a million different species that you could pick. Something that's a real bugbear of mine is that we see these big iconic plastic or whatever they are models around many of our cities and towns every so often. We've got a Wallace and Gromit trail in Bristol right now. There are dragons, there are unicorns, there are gorillas. You see these things painted, and they're great. They raise a lot of money for charity. But those statues are very rarely iconic British species. And we could be doing that a lot more, I think, in our towns and cities. We could really be championing what we have on our doorstep. So the first thing I would say is find your local champion. We do this with celebrities. We do this with local people who help out with charities. We've got wildlife-based celebs on our doorstep, which we should be getting people behind. People love their areas. People have a real sense of pride where they're from. We can do that with the natural world as well, I think. The other thing is an umbrella species. By fundamentally saving a particular species or a particular habitat, it has a knock-on effect. Now, you might be saying, well, look, we are cut for money. We don't have the resource. We don't have the opportunity or the time to save all these species. Ben's talking about 13% wildlife and species decline in the UK since the 1970s. We literally can't tackle all of those declining species. You're right. In Uganda, I used to run a huge project where we had the oldest and largest mahogany forest in East Africa. Huge mahogany trees that would be the same circumference as 10 to 12 people touching fingertips on outstretched arms. Massive trees, absolutely beautiful, but they were being logged. We also had over 600 species of butterfly, some that were only found in my forest or our forest. We also had about 450 species of birds, and many of those were endemic or found nowhere else on the planet. And no one cared, because realistically, no one really cares on a global scale about butterflies, birds, and some old trees. But what we did have were chimpanzees. Now, they're not critically endangered. They are vulnerable, / maybe endangered in certain areas. But they bring people in. They brought people in for ecotourism. They brought research money in. They brought a whole political support network in. So by saving the chimps, by working strongly with the chimps and closely with that community of animals in a particular species, it had a massive knock-on effect. And we didn't see logging. We saw cleaner waters. We saw fewer people going in, taking other animals for various reasons. By having that umbrella species, it has a massive knock-on effect here. You can also have umbrella habitats. So if you have your wildflower meadow, or you have your old woodland, or you have standing deadwood, then suddenly you've got a massive opportunity for other things in this wonderful domino effect behavior there. There are little things that we can all do as well. Something that I know you receive backlash for very often are things like netting, are things like spikes, are things like mowing meadows at certain times of the year that maybe, arguably, don't need to be mowed for aesthetic reasons or for various other reasons. I would look to see whether in a dual method, you can save money. You can save by not mowing these fields. We can save money in many ways, but actually we can then say it's a reason, and the reason behind that is to propagate and maintain these wildflower biodiversity-based habitats. With something as crucial as losing 97%, every single verge, every single bank, every single strip of green space that has wildflowers in is valuable. Each of these represents a tiny little, what we call a nature corridor, where it allows invertebrates and birds and newts and frogs and slow worms, you name it, to go from place to place to place to interconnect our wider habitats. What can you do at home? There's something all of us can do at home. We can be looking at the things that we talk about all the time from a political point of view, as well as a nature-based point of view. We can insulate our homes better. We can do more in terms of recycling and shopping in a more green capacity. We can walk, but we know all these things. These are the sort of things that we can do on a day-to-day scale. These are the things that are going to change the world. And that's a really important point. We don't need to do anything that's completely innovative. We don't need to suddenly find a huge amount of cash. And actually, over the last 25 years in the UK, more money has been pumped in to biodiversity and species conservation from a government perspective, from a centralized government perspective. Ironically, it hasn't had the desired impact. And I fundamentally, there isn't research on this, I fundamentally believe it's because we've made it a carrot or stick scenario. You must save nature. That's completely wrong. We should never be saying that. We should empower people. We should get them on side and use the passion that each of us has for the natural world. There are some, of course, who love the natural world and want to be covered in mud and running around looking for slugs and worms. I'm on that side of the fence. There are others who just enjoy driving past and seeing a field of poppies. Someone saying organic foods. Yes, Susan, there are a million different opportunities there. And churchyards. Yes, I'm loving that you're feeding ideas in here. Churchyards are an amazing space, a very quiet space for people, for reflection, but also a really important established area for nature to mature and to effectively represent a little island, often in a more desolate environment. Something you can tie into, and I know this can be politically difficult at times, but you can tie in with local charities. We have 46 or 47 now? I think it's still 46 wildlife trusts across the UK. Each one, well, most of them are county specific. Some bridge several counties. And some bridge whole countries, like Scottish Wildlife Trust. The wildlife trusts are always up for working with local communities and local partners and local stakeholders. So team in with them. So the churchyard point made me think of that. Norfolk Wildlife Trust, for example, has a whole bunch of mature habitats in churchyards around the county to try and do exactly what you were saying there. So to tie in, yes, to tie up, there are lots of opportunities to say it's all doom and gloom, but I fundamentally believe we have an opportunity to make a difference. We are a nature-loving island. We love our animals. We shout loud and proud about that. Are we doing enough? No. I think we make mistakes. I think we all make mistakes, and the optics are really important there. Why are new builds not all having little blocks for nests in terms of things like mason bees, and higher up in the eaves, things like swifts. Swifts are down by over 50%. They come all the way from Central and West Africa, fly to the UK, and have nowhere to nest. The street on which I live, we've put up, I think 15, maybe 16, 17 nest boxes for swifts over the last 5 years now. And finally, it takes time. We are seeing swifts nest back on these wonderful tall buildings where I am. So we can all do something about this. Find your local champions and empower people to really shout loud and proud and get involved in local projects. Find your umbrella species, find your flagship species, and make yours a local champion. You'll be surprised at what people will get behind, if it's quirky, if it's weird, if it's wonderful. But let them see the benefits and then get those people involved, tie it all together, and empower people to save and make a difference about the world around them. I know you got a lot to do and there is always more to do, but this is a fun project. It's an important project, but it's something you can all hopefully get behind. Thank you.